It was supposed to be the perfect New Year's Eve. I had spent the entire week preparing for the night, the last night of the year. For me, it wasn't just a celebration. It was a chance to start fresh, to leave behind the frustrations and miscommunications my husband, Nathan, and I had been having. We had hit a rough patch. Sure, but who hadn't after 10 years of marriage? I stood in the kitchen, dressed in a sleek black dress, my hair carefully curled, sipping champagne as I watched Nathan from the doorway. He looked so handsome in his tailored suit, laughing with his buddies by the fireplace. His charm was part of what made me fall in love with him years ago, and even though our relationship had changed, a part of me still held on to those memories. We had decided to host a New Year's party at our home this year. Just close friends, neighbors, a few of Nathan's colleagues. Nothing extravagant, but I wanted to make it special. Our living room sparkled with fairy lights. A large table filled with food sat in the corner, and the scent of freshly baked pastries filled the air. The snow outside created a winter wonderland backdrop, and I had high hopes that this would be a night to remember, a new beginning for us. But sometimes, new beginnings aren't what you expect. It started with little things. I noticed Nathan was distracted, his phone vibrating in his pocket more often than usual. He'd step out of the room to take a call, his tone hushed, words too soft to catch. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe work was demanding, or maybe one of his friends needed something. But then I saw it. She arrived about an hour after the party began. Tall, with long blonde hair that cascaded over her shoulders like a waterfall, and a tight red dress that hugged her every curve. I didn't recognize her, but she clearly knew Nathan. The way they hugged, how her hand lingered on his arm, how his eyes lit up when he saw her. It was like I wasn't even in the room. I pretended not to notice. After all, I didn't want to cause a scene. But throughout the night, I kept catching glimpses of them together, laughing at something secretive, their heads too close for comfort, her hand brushing against his as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And the way he looked at her, it was the kind of look he hadn't given me in months. I felt a knot form in my stomach. By midnight, my anxiety had reached its peak. The countdown began, and everyone gathered in the living room, champagne glasses in hand, excitement filling the air. I stood by Nathan's side, forcing a smile, hoping that he would kiss me at midnight and reassure me that everything was fine. But when the clock struck 12, and fireworks exploded in the distance, Nathan was gone. I turned around, and there he was outside on the porch with her. My heart raced as I watched them through the window. The cold winter air fogged up the glass, but I could still make out their silhouettes. They were close, too close. She laughed, her breath visible in the cold, and Nathan leaned in. Not a kiss, but the way his body tilted toward hers, the way he looked at her lips, it was enough to make me sick. I stormed outside, my heels sinking into the snow as I marched toward them. My chest tightened with anger and fear, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal, disbelief. As I approached, they separated quickly, but the damage was done. "Nathan," I said, my voice trembling. "What the hell is going on?" He looked startled, as if he hadn't expected me to come outside. The blonde, I still didn't know her name, took a step back, her eyes wide. "It's not what it looks like," Nathan said quickly, holding up his hands in a defensive gesture. I laughed bitterly. "It never is it?" My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at him, waiting for an explanation, for some excuse, something that would make sense of what I had just seen. But all I got was silence. The blonde shifted uncomfortably, then glanced at Nathan. "I should go," she muttered, giving him a brief look before slipping away, her heels clicking against the icy pavement as she disappeared into the night. I turned back to Nathan, tears stinging my eyes. "Who is she?" he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's a colleague. We've been working together for a while." I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. "And what? You thought it was a good idea to sneak off with her on New Year's Eve? While our friends are inside?" "It's not like that, Aaron. I swear. We were just talking. Just talking." My voice cracked. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Nathan looked at me, his expression softening, and for a moment, I saw the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago. But the moment passed, and the weight of everything between us settled in. I didn't know what was worse, the idea that he might be cheating or the realization that even if he wasn't, he had emotionally drifted so far away from me that he thought it was okay to spend the most important moment of the night with someone else. I took a step back, wrapping my arms around myself to fight off the cold. I don't even know who you are anymore. Nathan reached for me, but I pulled away, shaking my head. I needed space, time to think. The party was still going on inside, laughter and music spilling through the open door. But out here, it felt like everything was falling apart. I can't do this right now, I whispered, turning away from him. Aaron, wait. But I didn't wait. Couldn't. I walked back inside, past the smiling faces and the clinking glasses, heading straight for the stairs. I heard Nathan call my name again, but I didn't turn around. As I reached the bedroom, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and anger. How had we gotten here? How had the man I thought I knew so well become a stranger to me? I sat on the edge of the bed, the noise from the party fading into the background as I stared at the floor, lost in thought. I had always believed that if something like this happened, I would know what to do. I would confront it head-on, demand answers, make decisions. But in that moment, all I felt was numb. Nathan didn't follow me up the stairs. Maybe he knew it was pointless to try and explain. Maybe he didn't care enough to fix it. Either way, I was left alone, and for the first time in our marriage, I realized that might not be such a bad thing. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I stayed in the bedroom, away from the noise of the party, away from Nathan, and away from the pain that gnawed at my heart. I could hear the muted sounds of people downstairs, laughter and music carrying on as if nothing had happened. Part of me wanted to go down there, to act like I wasn't bothered, like I hadn't just seen my husband getting too close to another woman. But the larger part of me felt frozen in place, my mind spiraling. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone in hand, staring at the blank screen. It was like I was waiting for something, an apology, an explanation, a sign that this was just a misunderstanding. But nothing came. Time passed slowly, each second stretching out, the weight of what I had witnessed pressing down on me. The party downstairs eventually quieted, guests leaving one by one until the house fell into a deafening silence. I still hadn't seen Nathan. I wondered if he had even bothered to say goodbye to everyone, or if he was as lost in thought as I was. Finally, I heard footsteps outside the door, slow and hesitant. The door creaked open, and Nathan stood there, his face tired, the tension visible in his shoulders. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, waiting for me to speak. But I had no words for him. What could I say? That I was heartbroken? That I felt betrayed? I cleaned up downstairs, he said after a long moment, his voice hoarse. Everyone's gone. I didn't respond. My eyes stayed fixed on the floor. I could feel him watching me, waiting for some kind of reaction, but I wasn't ready to give him one. Aaron, he started, but his voice faltered. He stepped inside the room and sat down on the bed beside me, though he kept a small, awkward distance. About earlier, I don't want you to think that something was happening. It wasn't. I swear. I finally looked at him, my heart heavy. Then why did it feel like it? His eyes met mine, and for a second, I saw the guilt flicker there. I don't know, he admitted, his voice soft. I don't know how we got here. That was the problem, wasn't it? Neither of us knew how we had drifted so far apart. And now, here we were, sitting on the same bed but feeling miles away from each other. I need to understand, Nathan, I said, my voice trembling. Why her? Why did you go outside with her? You knew I was right there. You knew I would see. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I didn't think. It wasn't planned. It's just, she's been around a lot at work and we've talked about things, personal stuff. She's easy to talk to. The words cut deeper than I expected. Easy to talk to. Something that I hadn't been for him in a long time, apparently. I felt my chest tighten, the hurt bubbling up to the surface. I'm your wife, I said quietly, the words barely more than a whisper. Shouldn't I be the one you talk to about personal things? Nathan's face fell, his eyes filled with regret. You're right. You should be. But lately, it feels like we've been on different wavelengths. Every conversation turns into a fight or we just don't talk at all. I know I haven't been the best husband, Aaron. I know I've let you down. I blinked back the tears that had been threatening to fall. It was true. Our communication had been strained for a while now. But hearing him admit it out loud made the reality of it so much harder to bear. I'm not perfect either, I said, my voice shaking. I know I haven't been as open with you as I should have been. But that doesn't make this okay. Nathan, you were with her. And I saw how you looked at her. He shook his head. It wasn't like that. But it felt like it. Silence hung between us, thick and suffocating. Nathan lowered his head, and for the first time in a long while, he looked vulnerable, like the weight of his actions had finally sunk in. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I wanted to forgive him. I wanted to believe that this was just a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. But there was a part of me, a small, gnawing part, that wondered if this was just the beginning of a much deeper issue between us. If we didn't fix it now, would this happen again? Would there be more nights like this? More women like her? I stood up, my heart aching. I need time, I said, my voice barely audible. I need to think. Nathan's face fell, but he nodded slowly, understanding that I wasn't ready to move past this just yet. Without another word, I left the room, walking down the hallway and into the guest bedroom. I closed the door behind me, the weight of the night pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My mind was racing, replaying every interaction between Nathan and that woman, every moment that led us to this point. How had we drifted so far apart? Could we ever find our way back? The days that followed felt like a strange, quiet limbo. Nathan and I barely spoke, living in the same house but occupying different spaces, both physically and emotionally. I stayed in the guest bedroom, unable to face the thought of sleeping beside him just yet. Nathan, for his part, gave me space, though I could tell it pained him. It wasn't just about what had happened that night anymore. It was about everything that had built up over the years, the missed conversations, the growing distance, the slow erosion of the connection we once had. And I couldn't help but wonder, had he emotionally checked out long before that night with her? I found myself going through the motions, waking up, working, coming home, but never really engaging. I couldn't stop thinking about the blonde woman, about the way Nathan had looked at her. Was it just a passing attraction? Or had there been something more between them? Had there been more than just that night? One evening, about a week after New Year's, I decided I couldn't keep torturing myself with questions anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. Nathan was in the living room, sitting on the couch with his laptop, when I finally approached him. He looked up at me, surprised, as I sat down beside him. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil I felt inside. He closed the laptop and turned to face me, his expression serious. I know. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us. About her. Nathan's face tensed at the mention of the other woman, and he immediately shook his head. Aaron, I swear to you, there was nothing between us. It was just, I don't know, a stupid moment. A lapse in judgment. I never crossed the line with her. I searched his eyes for any hint of dishonesty, but all I saw was sincerity. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. But you wanted to, didn't you? The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for too long. Nathan's eyes darkened, and he hesitated for a moment before speaking. I don't know, he finally admitted. Maybe for a second I did, but it wasn't about her. It was about how lost I've been, how lost we've been. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about some fleeting attraction to another woman. It was about us, about everything we had let slip away over the years. And for the first time, I realized that this wasn't just about Nathan's mistake. It was about the cracks in our marriage that had been forming for a long time. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. Nathan's face fell, and he looked down at his hands, his fingers gripping the edge of the couch. I understand. I wouldn't blame you if you couldn't. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of our words hanging in the air. There was so much unsaid, so much we hadn't dealt with over the years. And now it felt like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if we were going to fall or find a way back. I don't want to lose you, Nathan finally said, his voice thick with emotion. But I don't know how to fix this. Neither did I. The days dragged on, each one blending into the next as Nathan and I lived in this strange, silent purgatory. It was like walking on a frozen lake, knowing the ice could crack beneath us at any moment, and neither of us was sure if we'd fall through or make it to the other side. I had moved back to our bedroom, but the distance between us felt larger than ever. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long we could keep pretending everything was normal. Nathan was trying. I could see it in the little things. He'd come home early from work, offer to cook dinner, or ask me about my day. But it felt forced, like he was trying to compensate for something he couldn't take back. And I couldn't shake the image of him with that woman, their whispered conversation, the way he had looked at her. It haunted me. One morning, about 2 weeks after that disastrous New Year's Eve, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee, lost in thought. Nathan had already left for work, and the house was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't know how much longer I could live like this, stuck in limbo, neither forgiving nor moving on, just existing in the space between love and betrayal. I needed something to change. I needed to make a decision. But the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. That's when my phone buzzed on the table, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from my best friend, Sarah. Hey, how are you holding up? Thinking of you. I stared at the message for a moment before responding. I'm managing. Barely. Sarah had been my rock through all of this, though I hadn't told her the full extent of what had happened with Nathan. She knew things were rough between us, but I couldn't bring myself to share the details of his emotional betrayal. Maybe because I didn't want to admit it to myself yet. Let's get drinks tonight, she texted back. You need to get out of that house. I hesitated, glancing around the empty kitchen. She was right. I needed to get out, clear my head. I couldn't keep hiding from the world and wallowing in my own confusion. Maybe a night out with Sarah was exactly what I needed. Sure, I typed back. Let's do it. That evening, I met Sarah at a cozy bar downtown. It was the kind of place we used to go to before life got complicated, before marriage, kids, and the weight of responsibilities had settled in. The warm glow of the dim lights and the chatter of other patrons felt comforting, like a slice of normalcy in the middle of the chaos my life had become. Sarah greeted me with a tight hug, her eyes full of concern. You look like you've been through the ringer, she said, giving me a once-over. I laughed weakly, shaking my head. I feel like it. We ordered drinks and found a quiet booth in the corner. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Sarah had that effect on me. She always knew how to make me feel grounded, no matter how much my world was spinning out of control. So, she said after taking a sip of her wine, are you going to tell me what's really going on with you and Nathan? I froze for a moment, staring down at my drink. I had been avoiding this conversation for so long, but I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up forever. Sarah was my best friend. If I couldn't talk to her about this, who could I talk to? It's complicated, I said finally, swirling the wine in my glass. Things have been bad for a while, and on New Year's, I saw something. Sarah's brow furrowed, and she leaned in, her full attention on me. What did you see? I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly as I recounted the events of that night. The party, the blonde woman, how I had found Nathan outside with her, the way they had been too close for comfort. By the time I finished, my voice was barely above a whisper. And now, I don't know what to do, I admitted, feeling the weight of my own words. He says nothing happened, but it's like, I can't trust him. I don't know if I want to stay or leave. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing everything I had told her. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Aaron, I'm so sorry. That's awful." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I just feel so lost, Sarah. I don't know if I can move past this. Even if he didn't physically cheat, it feels like he's already crossed a line." She bit her lip, her expression thoughtful. "Have you guys thought about therapy? Maybe couples counseling? It might help you both figure out where you stand." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "We talked about it a while back, but we never followed through. I don't even know if Nathan would be open to it now." Sarah gave me a sympathetic smile. "You should at least try. If you still love him, and if he's willing to put in the work, maybe it's not too late." The idea of therapy had crossed my mind more than once in the past few weeks, but I hadn't seriously considered it. Maybe because I wasn't sure if we were both committed enough to actually make it work. But sitting there with Sarah, talking things out, I realized that I didn't want to walk away without trying everything. Maybe it was worth one last shot. That night, when I returned home, I found Nathan in the living room, sitting on the couch with the TV on. He glanced up when I walked in, a look of relief washing over his face. It was strange how we had become strangers in our own home, polite, distant, tiptoeing around each other like we were afraid to break whatever fragile piece still existed between us. "How was your night?" he asked, his voice careful, as if he didn't want to say the wrong thing. "It was good," I replied, slipping off my coat and hanging it by the door. "I met up with Sarah." Nathan nodded, but there was a tension in the air, a feeling that we were both waiting for the other to say something more. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation I knew we needed to have. "Nathan, we need to talk." His face tensed, and he turned off the TV, giving me his full attention. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been thinking the same thing." I sat down on the couch across from him, my hands folded in my lap. "I don't know how to move past this," I admitted, the vulnerability in my voice taking me by surprise. "I don't know if we can fix what's broken between us." Nathan's eyes softened, and he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I've been thinking about that too, and I know. I messed up. I let us drift apart, and I let you down. But Aaron, I don't want to lose you." There was a sincerity in his voice that tugged at my heart, but the pain of the past weeks still weighed heavy on me. "I don't want to lose you either," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "But I can't pretend that everything's fine." "We're not fine." Nathan nodded, his face etched with regret. "I know, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right, if you'll give me the chance." The silence between us stretched out, thick with unspoken words. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive him. I didn't know if I could forget the hurt that had settled between us. But Sarah's words echoed in my mind. If I still loved him, maybe it wasn't too late to try. "What if we try therapy?" I suggested, my voice trembling slightly. "Couples counseling, to figure out if we can make this work." Nathan's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought he might resist. But then he nodded, his expression determined. "If that's what you want, I'm in. I'll do whatever it takes." His willingness to try, to really try, gave me a small flicker of hope, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe we weren't beyond saving. Maybe, with help, we could find our way back to each other. The next few weeks were a blur of difficult conversations, therapy sessions, and moments of painful self-reflection. Nathan and I started couples counseling, and while it wasn't easy, it forced us to confront the issues that had been festering beneath the surface for years. Our counselor, a gentle but firm woman named Dr. Lacey, helped us dig through the layers of resentment, hurt, and misunderstandings that had built up over time. Some sessions were brutal, leaving us both emotionally raw. We talked about everything: our communication issues, the emotional distance, the way we had stopped prioritizing each other. And, of course, we talked about her, the woman from New Year's. Though Nathan maintained that nothing had happened between them, I still struggled with the betrayal I felt, the sense that he had emotionally strayed from our marriage. Trust takes time to rebuild, Dr. Lacey told us during one session. It's not something that happens overnight. But the fact that you're both here, willing to put in the work, is a good sign. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could rebuild what had been broken, that we could find a way back to each other. But the truth was, there were still days when I wasn't sure. Some mornings, I woke up feeling hopeful, like maybe we were finally making progress. Other days, I felt like we were just going through the motions, pretending to be okay when we weren't. Nathan was trying, I couldn't deny that. He had become more attentive, more present in our marriage. He listened when I talked, really listened, in a way he hadn't in years. And I was trying too, working on letting go of the anger and resentment I had been holding on to. But it was a slow process, and there were still moments when I found myself questioning everything. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, Nathan and I sat on the couch in silence, both of us exhausted from the emotional toll of the day. "Do you think we'll ever get back to how we were?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan looked at me, his expression serious. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think we can be better than we were." It was a simple statement, but it struck a chord with me. Maybe we couldn't go back to the way things had been. Maybe we had both changed too much, grown too far apart to ever recapture the magic of our early years together. But maybe, just maybe, we could build something new, something stronger, more honest. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The routine of therapy, work, and life began to blur together. But the weight of what had happened between Nathan and me never completely lifted. It felt like we were moving in slow motion, rebuilding, piece by piece, a marriage that had once felt so strong but was now fragile and tentative. Some days I felt like I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, a flicker of hope that maybe we could come out of this stronger. Nathan was consistent in his efforts. He was home more often, and his phone was no longer a constant distraction. We talked more, really talked, about everything that had been brewing under the surface for years. Therapy had given us a platform to communicate openly, and I could feel us growing closer again, though the progress was painfully slow. But then there were other days, darker days, when doubt crept in. I would see a notification pop up on his phone, or he would mention a female colleague, and that sick, hollow feeling would return to the pit of my stomach. It wasn't that I thought he was still being unfaithful. It was the lingering scar of what had almost happened, the crack in our foundation that I wasn't sure could ever fully heal. One night, after a long day of work, I found myself staring at the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection as if I were looking at a stranger. I barely recognized the woman I had become. My eyes were tired, the sparkle I once had replaced by shadows of worry and doubt. The past few months had taken their toll, and I couldn't help but wonder if all this effort, all this pain, was truly worth it. Was I fighting for a marriage that could never go back to what it was? Or was I holding on to something because I was afraid of what life would look like without it? Nathan knocked softly on the bathroom door, pulling me from my thoughts. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, but tinged with the same uncertainty that had become a constant presence between us. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was telling the truth. "Yeah, just tired." He stepped into the bathroom, standing beside me in front of the mirror, our reflections side by side. For a moment, we both stared at each other in the glass, and I wondered if he saw the same thing I did. Two people trying to find their way back to each other but unsure if they ever truly would. "I miss you," he said quietly, breaking the silence. His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything we had lost. I looked at him, my chest tightening. "I miss you too." It was the truth. I missed him, the man I had married, the man who had once been my best friend, my partner in everything. But even as I said it, I realized that what I missed most wasn't just him, but the version of us that no longer existed. Nathan reached for my hand, his touch warm but tentative. "I know I've said it before, but I'm really sorry, Aaron. I'm sorry for everything." I squeezed his hand, appreciating the apology, though I had heard it so many times before. "I know, and I'm trying to move forward. But it's hard," he finished for me, his voice soft. "I get it." We stood there for a long time, neither of us saying anything, just holding hands in front of that mirror, two people trying to make sense of the pieces of their shattered lives. One evening in late March, After another counseling session, Nathan surprised me with an idea. We had spent the past few months drowning in discussions about our relationship. Therapy, late-night talks, constant reflection, and while it was necessary, it was also draining. I hadn't realized how much I missed just being with him without the weight of everything hanging over us. "How about we get away for a weekend?" he suggested over dinner, his voice cautious, as if he was afraid I might reject the idea outright. Just the two of us. No therapy, no heavy conversations. Just us, relaxing somewhere quiet. At first, I hesitated. The idea of a weekend alone with Nathan felt daunting, like we'd be stripping away the distractions and forcing ourselves to confront everything head-on. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe that was exactly what we needed. We had been doing the work, yes, but we hadn't really taken the time to reconnect on a personal level, to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place. "Okay," I said, a small smile creeping onto my face. "Let's do it." A week later, we packed up the car and headed out to a cabin in the mountains. It was a place we had been to a few times before, back when we were younger, happier, and so in love that we couldn't imagine anything ever coming between us. As we drove up the winding roads, the familiar scenery brought back memories of those simpler times. Lazy afternoons by the lake, long hikes through the woods, nights spent curled up by the fire. But as beautiful as the setting was, I couldn't shake the underlying tension. Would this trip bring us closer together, or would it expose just how far we had drifted? When we arrived at the cabin, it was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was just as I remembered: the rustic wooden furniture, the stone fireplace, the large windows overlooking the forest. For a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia, and I wondered if we could ever recapture the magic of those early years. The first evening was quiet. We unpacked, made dinner together, and sat by the fire, sipping wine in comfortable silence. Felt nice, almost normal. But as the night wore on, I could feel the unspoken words between us. The things we hadn't said, the fears and doubts that still lingered in the air. Finally, Nathan broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder if we'll really make it through this?" His question caught me off guard, though it was something I had been asking myself for months. I stared into the flames, my thoughts swirling. "Yeah," I admitted. "I wonder that a lot." Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I want to believe we can, but sometimes I feel like I've damaged us beyond repair." I turned to look at him, his face illuminated by the firelight, and for the first time in a long time, I saw just how deeply this was affecting him. It wasn't just me who was struggling with doubt and pain. He was too. "I don't know the answer, Nathan," I said softly. "I don't know if we'll make it, but I do know that we're trying. And that has to count for something." He nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I don't want to lose you," he said again. The same words he had said months ago, but this time, they felt heavier, more real. For the rest of the weekend, we tried to focus on the little things. We went for long hikes, sat by the lake, and cooked meals together. There were moments when I felt a flicker of that old connection. The laughter, the easy conversation, the comfort of being in each other's presence. But there were also moments of silence, of doubt creeping in when we least expected it. One night, as we sat by the fire, Nathan reached over and took my hand. "I've been thinking a lot about what Dr. Lacey said," he began, his voice quiet, "about rebuilding trust." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I know it's going to take time," he said, "but I want you to know that I'm committed to earning back your trust, whatever it takes. If we have to start over completely, I'm willing to do that." His words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a small glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. And maybe, after everything we had been through, something was enough. As spring turned into summer, Nathan and I fell into a new routine. We continued with therapy, but it felt different now. There was less tension, fewer explosive arguments, and more genuine communication. We were learning to listen to each other again, to be patient with each other's flaws. There were still moments of doubt, of course. I couldn't expect years of neglect and one near affair to vanish overnight, but we were making progress. The cabin trip had given us a chance to reconnect in a way we hadn't been able to in months. It wasn't perfect, but it had reminded us that there was still something worth fighting for. That the love we had once shared wasn't entirely gone, even if it had been buried under layers of hurt. But the trust? That was the hardest part. There were times when I felt like we were truly rebuilding, like I could see a future where we were stronger, more connected than ever before. And then something small would happen. A phone call he took in another room, a work trip he had to take, a text message from a colleague, and I would be thrown right back into that pit of insecurity and doubt. I wanted to trust him again, I really did. But every time I tried, the memories of New Year's Eve would come rushing back, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story that I still didn't know. One particularly difficult night, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, the familiar sense of dread creeping in. Nathan was asleep beside me, his breathing steady and calm, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept thinking about that woman, the blonde with the red dress, and all the things I didn't know about her. What was her name? Did she still work with Nathan? Had there been other moments like the one I had witnessed, ones that I hadn't seen? The questions swirled in my mind until I couldn't take it anymore. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and made my way downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed answers. I needed to know if my fears were justified or if I was torturing myself over something that had never truly happened. Nathan had always been careful with his phone, but tonight, as I stood in the dark kitchen, I saw it sitting on the counter, unlocked. The temptation was overwhelming, and before I could stop myself, I picked it up. My hands trembled as I scrolled through his messages. Most of them were harmless work emails, texts with friends, a few with me. But then, I saw her name, Lindsay. My heart raced as I opened the thread. There weren't many messages, and nothing seemed overly flirtatious. But there was an undeniable familiarity in the way they spoke to each other. Short conversations about work, the occasional joke, nothing explicitly inappropriate. But it was there, that connection I had seen between them that night. And then I saw it. A message from months ago, before New Year's, when everything had started to fall apart. Lindsay, you're the only one I can really talk to about this stuff. I don't know what I'd do without you. Nathan, I'm always here for you. You know that. I feel the same way. I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't an affair. It wasn't physical. But it was emotional. And in that moment, I realized that was almost worse. He had shared parts of himself with her that he hadn't shared with me in years. They had leaned on each other in ways that should have been reserved for us. And even if nothing had crossed a physical line, the emotional intimacy they had built was enough to break me all over again. I put the phone down, my hands shaking, and sank into a chair at the kitchen table, tears filling my eyes. This was what I had been afraid of. This was the shadow that had been looming over us for months. It wasn't just about trust. It was about the fact that, even now, part of him was still connected to her, and I wasn't sure if I could ever be okay with that. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy weight in my chest. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. If there was any chance of saving our marriage, I needed to confront Nathan about what I had found. I had been avoiding this conversation for too long, hoping that time and therapy would fix everything. But now I realized that trust couldn't be rebuilt if there were still secrets between us. Nathan was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, when I came downstairs. He looked up at me with a smile, but it faded quickly when he saw the expression on my face. "Aaron?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice trembling. "About Lindsay." Nathan's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. He set down his coffee cup, his hands suddenly fidgeting. "Aaron, I know nothing happened physically," I interrupted, my voice firmer than I expected. "But emotionally, you were there with her, Nathan. You connected with her in a way that you hadn't with me in years. And that's what hurts the most." He looked down at his hands, his face etched with guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't realize." "Didn't realize what?" I demanded, the anger bubbling up inside me. Didn't realize that sharing your feelings with another woman while you shut me out would hurt? Didn't realize that I'd notice when you started pulling away? Nathan ran a hand through his hair, his expression pained. I knew it was wrong, he admitted. I knew I was crossing a line, but at the time, I didn't know how to stop. We weren't connecting, Aaron. I felt like you didn't want to talk to me anymore. And she was just there. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The truth I had been dreading but had always suspected. He had turned to her because I wasn't enough for him anymore, because our marriage had become too broken for him to find solace in me. I'm sorry, Nathan said again, his voice thick with emotion. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to feel weak. You should have come to me, I whispered, my voice cracking. We could have fixed this before it got so bad. But instead, you turned to her. Nathan reached for my hand, but I pulled away. The pain too raw, too fresh. I know I messed up, he said, his voice breaking. I know I let you down in the worst way possible. But I'm here now and I'm trying. I love you, Aaron. I don't want to lose you. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, the guilt, the regret. But I also saw the distance between us, the cracks that had grown too wide to ignore. Could we really come back from this? Could we ever truly repair what had been broken? I don't know if love is enough anymore, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Nathan's face crumbled, and for a moment, I saw the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago. Vulnerable, lost, desperate to make things right. But I didn't know if I had anything left to give. The silence between us lingered long after my words had settled into the air. Nathan sat across from me, his expression stricken, and for the first time in years, I saw tears forming in his eyes. But even then, I couldn't find the strength to comfort him. I couldn't bring myself to cross that emotional distance that had become so vast between us. He wiped his eyes quickly, trying to regain his composure, though I could tell he was struggling. Aaron, he began softly, his voice shaky. I know I've messed up in ways that can't just be undone, but I've been trying so hard to show you that I'm committed to this, to us. I know I failed you, but I love you. The words "I love you" echoed in my mind, but they felt hollow now. Love wasn't enough. It hadn't been enough to keep him from finding solace in someone else. It hadn't been enough to keep us from drifting apart in the first place. I had spent months in therapy, trying to convince myself that love could fix what was broken. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe love wasn't the foundation I thought it was. I looked down at my hands, tracing the lines of my wedding ring, the symbol of a promise we had made so long ago, a promise we had both broken in our own ways. My heart was heavy with the weight of it all, the overwhelming sadness of what our marriage had become. I don't know what to do anymore, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I'm trying, Nathan. I really am. But I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I used to. His shoulders slumped, and he ran a hand through his hair, his expression filled with regret. I understand, he said quietly, and I don't expect you to just forgive me and move on. But I'm not giving up on us. Not yet. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could somehow find our way back to each other. But the truth was, part of me had already started to let go. Maybe it was self-preservation, or maybe it was the slow, painful realization that the person sitting in front of me wasn't the same man I had married. And I wasn't the same woman either. The days that followed were filled with an unbearable tension. We went through the motions of daily life, work, cooking dinner, brief exchanges about mundane things like bills and schedules. But underneath it all, the silence between us grew louder. Nathan continued to make small gestures, like bringing me flowers or offering to help around the house more. But it felt like he was trying to patch up a dam with band-aids. The cracks were too deep, the flood too powerful. One night, after another counseling session, I found myself standing in front of our bedroom window, staring out at the darkened street. The therapist had pushed us to talk about the future, to envision what our marriage would look like if we truly committed to rebuilding. But I couldn't picture it. I couldn't see a version of us that wasn't weighed down by the past, by the pain of what had happened. Nathan was in the shower, and the sound of the water running filled the silence in the room. I stood there, lost in thought, my heart heavy with indecision. How much longer could I keep pretending that I was okay? How much longer could I hold onto something that felt like it was slipping through my fingers? When Nathan emerged from the bathroom, his hair damp and a towel wrapped around his waist, he gave me a tentative smile. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. I turned to face him, the question hanging in the air between us. Was I okay? No, I wasn't, and I hadn't been for a long time. "I think we need some time apart," I said quietly, the words spilling out before I had fully processed them. But once they were out, I knew they were the truth. Nathan froze, his face paling. "What?" His voice cracked slightly, and he took a step closer to me. "Aaron, we've been doing the work. We've been trying. Why? Why would you want to separate now?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Because I don't know who I am anymore," I admitted. "I've spent so long trying to fix us, trying to make things work, that I've lost myself in the process. I don't even know if I want this anymore. I don't know if we're staying together because we really love each other or because we're too scared to let go." Nathan's eyes widened, and I saw the panic set in. "Aaron, please," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "I love you. I know I messed up, but I'm still here. We can fix this. Don't give up on us." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. "I'm not giving up," I said softly. "I just need space. I need time to figure out what I want, who I am outside of this marriage. We've been trying so hard to save something that might not be savable, and I don't even know what I'm fighting for anymore." Nathan's face crumpled, and he took a step back, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "If that's what you need," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "then I'll give it to you. But, Aaron, I don't want to lose you." "I know," I whispered, my heart aching. "I don't want to lose you either. But maybe we've already lost each other." The next morning, I packed a small suitcase, filling it with the essentials. Clothes, toiletries, a book I hadn't had the time to read in months. Nathan watched silently from the doorway, his face drawn and weary. Neither of us had slept much the night before. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life, walking out of my own home after so many years of building it together. "I'm not leaving for good," I said, my voice cracking slightly as I zipped up the bag. "I just need some time to think, to clear my head." Nathan nodded, though I could see the pain in his eyes. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Sarah's," I replied. "She said I could stay with her for a while." He didn't say anything, just nodded again. There was nothing left to say, really. We had exhausted all the words, all the apologies, all the promises that things would get better. Now it was just this, the unbearable weight of uncertainty. I walked to the door, my heart heavy in my chest. When I reached for the handle, Nathan spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Aaron. I always will." I paused, the words catching in my throat. "I love you too," I said softly, "but I need to figure out if that's enough." And with that, I walked out the door, leaving behind the life we had built together. It wasn't a final goodbye, but it felt like the end of something, the end of who we used to be. Now, I was left to figure out if there was anything worth salvaging from the wreckage. The first few days at Sarah's felt strange. Her apartment was small, cozy, and filled with the kind of warmth that only comes from someone living a life untethered by the weight of a broken relationship. I envied her simplicity, her freedom. She had been single for a while, dating here and there but never settling down. I hadn't realized how much I had craved that kind of freedom until I was suddenly given it. Sarah was a good friend. She didn't push me to talk, didn't pry for details, but she was there when I needed her. We spent our evenings watching movies, eating takeout, and drinking too much wine. It was the kind of escape I hadn't allowed myself in years, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of lightness, as if I had shed some of the emotional baggage I had been carrying. But even in those moments of reprieve, I couldn't escape the constant churn of thoughts in my head. What was I supposed to do now? Nathan and I had spent years building a life together. But had we done it at the expense of our own happiness? Had we held on too tightly to something that was already broken, too afraid to admit that we had outgrown each other? One evening, about a week after I had left home, Sarah and I sat on her balcony, the cool evening air refreshing against my skin. The city hummed with life below us, people going about their lives, unaware of the turmoil I was feeling. "You've been quiet," Sarah said, taking a sip of her wine. "You don't have to tell me everything, but are you okay?" I shrugged, staring out at the skyline. "I don't know. I guess I'm still trying to figure that out." She nodded, her expression understanding. "It's a lot to process. But, Aaron, you deserve to be happy. Whatever that looks like. Don't settle just because it's easier than letting go." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was true. I had spent so long trying to make things work with Nathan because I was scared of what life would look like without him. But now, with this space between us, I was starting to realize that maybe happiness wasn't something I could find within our marriage anymore. Maybe it was something I needed to find on my own. As the days turned into weeks, I began to find a sense of peace in my newfound independence. I spent time reconnecting with old friends, doing things for myself that I hadn't done in years. Yoga classes, reading books, long walks through the park. Things that had once seemed like luxuries now became necessities in my quest to rediscover who I was outside of being Nathan's wife. But even as I began to heal, there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of the love I had for him. I missed the way we used to be, before everything had fallen apart. I missed the comfort of knowing he was there, my partner, my confidant. And I couldn't help but wonder if, after all this time, there was still something worth fighting for. One evening, about a month after I had left, Nathan called me. It was the first time we had spoken since I had walked out the door, and my heart raced when I saw his name flash across the screen. "Hey," I said softly, answering the call. "Hey," he replied, his voice warm but tentative. "How are you?" "I'm okay," I said, though the truth was more complicated than that. I wasn't sure how to explain everything I had been feeling, everything I had been going through since we'd been apart. "I've been thinking about you," Nathan said after a moment of silence. "I miss you, Aaron." The words hit me like a wave, and I felt the familiar ache in my chest. "I miss you too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could feel the weight of everything we had left unsaid. Finally, Nathan spoke again, his voice soft but determined. "Do you think we could meet? Just to talk?" I hesitated, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to say yes, to rush back into his arms and pretend that everything could be fixed with one conversation. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger over the past few weeks, knew that it wasn't that simple. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's meet." We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, a place we had gone to on one of our first dates, years ago when we were still learning everything about each other. The nostalgia of it all weighed heavily on me as I walked through the door, my heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Nathan was already there, sitting at a table near the window, his hands folded nervously in front of him. When he saw me, he stood up, offering me a tentative smile. He looked different somehow, older, more tired, but there was something else too. A softness in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Hey," he replied, his voice warm but filled with the same uncertainty that I felt. For a moment we just sat there, staring at each other, both of us unsure how to start. Finally, Nathan broke the silence. "I've missed you," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. "Being apart. It's made me realize just how much I need you in my life, Aaron." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "I've missed you too," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But I've been thinking a lot. About us. About everything that's happened." Nathan nodded, his expression serious. "I know. I've been doing the same." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. "I don't know if we can go back to how things were. I don't even know if we should. But I think I'm ready to try, if you are." his eyes filled with hope, and for the first time in months, I saw the man I had fallen in love with so long ago, the man who had been my partner, my confidant, my best friend. "I'm ready," he said quietly, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Whatever it takes, I'm ready." It wasn't an easy road. The months that followed were filled with ups and downs, moments of doubt and moments of hope. Nathan and I continued therapy, working through the layers of hurt and mistrust that had built up over the years. There were days when it felt like we were making progress, like we were rediscovering the love we had lost. And there were days when the weight of everything still hung heavy over us, threatening to pull us apart again. But through it all, we kept fighting. Fighting for each other. Fighting for the marriage we had both nearly given up on. And slowly, gradually, we began to heal. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were no grand declarations of love, no perfect moments where everything magically fell into place. But there was something even more important, a commitment to rebuilding, to being better for each other, to not letting the mistakes of the past define our future. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our home, watching the sunset together, Nathan turned to me, his eyes filled with a quiet kind of love that I hadn't seen in a long time. "We made it," he said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of wonder and relief. "I didn't think we would, but we made it." I smiled, leaning my head on his shoulder. "Yeah," I whispered. "We did." And in that moment, I realized that while we would never be the same as we once were, maybe that was okay. Maybe we were stronger now, more resilient. We had faced our demons together and apart, and come out the other side. This wasn't the ending I had imagined for us, but it was a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like that was enough. For a while, things felt steady, almost normal. Nathan and I had rebuilt our routines, finding comfort in the small things that had once brought us together. We cooked dinner together most nights, went on long walks through the neighborhood, and spent quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun set over the horizon. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. But even as we tried to move forward, there was an undercurrent, a quiet storm that brewed just beneath the surface. Trust, as fragile as it had become, was still something I wrestled with. Nathan was doing everything he could to prove himself, to show me that he was committed, but deep down I still felt that fear, the fear that something could happen again, that another Lindsay might come along and pull us apart. I didn't bring it up often, not wanting to shatter the peace we had worked so hard to rebuild, but I knew I couldn't keep pushing it down forever. Every time Nathan had to work late, every time he took a phone call out of earshot, that doubt would creep back in, gnawing at the edges of my mind. One evening, as we were getting ready for bed, I couldn't hold it in anymore. We had just finished a long day, work, errands, therapy, and I felt emotionally drained. Nathan was brushing his teeth in the bathroom, and I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, my mind racing with thoughts I hadn't voiced. When he walked into the bedroom, he must have noticed something was off. "You okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I wanted to dive into this again, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. "Nathan," I began, my voice quieter than I intended, "I know you've been trying, and I've been trying too, but I still have doubts. I still don't fully trust you." He stood still, his expression softening as he processed my words. He didn't seem surprised, but there was a flicker of sadness in his eyes. "I understand," he said softly, sitting down next to me. "It's going to take time, and I know I have to earn it." I looked up at him, the frustration and exhaustion bubbling up inside me. "But what if it never comes back?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What if I'm always second-guessing everything? Every time you're late from work, every time you get a message from a woman at work, I can't help but feel this pit in my stomach. And it's exhausting, Nathan." He nodded slowly, his hands clasped together in his lap. "I know it's not fair for you to feel that way," he said. "And I wish I could take it all away, but I can't. All I can do is show you that I'm here, that I'm not going anywhere, and that you can trust me again." The sincerity in his voice hit me, but the doubt remained. It wasn't that I didn't want to trust him. I did. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and I was starting to realize that it might never fully return. I don't know how long I can keep doing this, I admitted, my voice cracking. It's been months, and I'm still not sure if we're going to make it. And I don't know if I can live like this. Always wondering, always questioning. Nathan's face fell, and for a moment, I saw the fear in his eyes. Fear that he was losing me again. What do you want to do? He asked, his voice small, as if he was afraid of the answer. I took a deep breath, my chest tight with the weight of everything that had been building up. I think we need to take a real break, I said slowly, the words feeling like a knife in my chest. Not just time apart like before, but I think we need to separate for a while, to really see if we can make this work, or if we're just holding on to something that's already gone. Nathan's expression shifted from sadness to shock, and then to something deeper, a kind of resignation. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince me otherwise. Instead, he nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. If that's what you think we need, he said quietly, then I'll respect that. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the unspoken realization that we had reached the breaking point. It wasn't what I wanted, not really. But I couldn't keep living in the in-between, couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when the cracks in our marriage were still so visible. The next few weeks passed in a daze. Nathan and I made the decision to live separately for a while. He moved into a small apartment downtown while I stayed in our home. It felt strange, like a ghost of the life we had shared still lingered in the walls of the house. But in a way, the silence was comforting. I no longer had to wrestle with the tension between us, no longer had to question his every move. The space, though painful, gave me a chance to breathe. Sarah continued to be my anchor. She checked in on me almost every day, always making sure I wasn't drowning in my thoughts. We spent more evenings together than I could count. Her presence a balm to the emotional wounds I was still nursing. You did the right thing, she reassured me one night as we sat on her couch, a glass of wine in each of our hands. You needed this time apart. It's not the end of the world if you and Nathan need to rebuild separately before you decide what comes next. I know, I said, though my voice was thick with uncertainty. But it still feels like I've failed. You haven't failed, Sarah said firmly. You're taking control of your life, figuring out what you need. That's not failure, Aaron. That's growth. Her words were comforting, but I still couldn't shake the sadness that had settled into my bones. I had never imagined my marriage would come to this, living apart, separated by walls and silence. But in a strange way, it felt like the only option left. I kept myself busy during the day, throwing myself into work and projects around the house. I started repainting the walls of the guest room, a task that gave me something to focus on other than the void Nathan had left behind. It was therapeutic in its own way, a chance to physically reshape my surroundings, just as I was trying to reshape my life. But at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of the day settled in, I couldn't help but think about Nathan. I wondered if he was feeling the same sense of loss, the same uncertainty. We still spoke occasionally, mostly about practical things, bills, appointments, the mundane details of life, but we avoided the deeper conversations, the ones that really mattered. It was as if we were both afraid of what we might discover if we dug too deep. One evening, as I sat alone on the porch, watching the stars blink to life in the sky, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Nathan. Can we meet? I miss you. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. I missed him too, more than I wanted to admit, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to face him, to confront everything we had left unresolved. After a long moment, I typed out a response. Okay, tomorrow night. We met the next evening at the same cafe where we had shared so many conversations before, both good and bad. The nostalgia of it hit me as I walked in, the familiar scent of coffee and pastries wafting through the air. Nathan was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner, just as he had been the last time we met here. But this time his expression was different, calmer, more resolved. When I sat down, he smiled at me, though there was a sadness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Thank you for coming, he said softly. I nodded, unsure of what to say. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us gathering our thoughts, before Nathan finally spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "About us, about everything that's happened. And I realized something." I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for him to continue. "I realized that I've been holding on to the idea of us," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "The version of us that I've been trying to save. It's not real anymore. It's not who we are now. And I think that's part of why we've struggled so much. We've been trying to fix something that doesn't exist anymore." His words hit me like a wave, and I felt my chest tighten. He was right. We had been clinging to the past, to the version of our relationship that had existed years ago, before the distance, before the hurt. But that version of us was gone. And maybe it was time to let it go. "What does that mean for us?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan sighed, his expression softening. "I think it means we need to start over," he said. "Not as the people we used to be, but as who we are now. And if we can't do that, then maybe we need to let each other go." The weight of his words settled over me, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity. He was right. We couldn't keep trying to salvage something that no longer existed. If we wanted to move forward, we had to rebuild, not from the remnants of our past, but from the people we had become. "I don't want to let you go," I said softly, tears welling up in my eyes. "But I don't want to keep hurting either." Nathan reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "I don't either," he whispered. "But I'm willing to try, Aaron. I'm willing to rebuild with you, if you'll have me." The tears finally spilled over, and I nodded, squeezing his hand tightly. "I want to try," I said, my voice breaking. "I want to rebuild." For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we could find a new version of us. One that was stronger, more honest, and more real than anything we had ever had before. The next few months were a slow, deliberate process. Nathan and I agreed to continue living separately for the time being, giving ourselves the space we needed to heal and grow individually before trying to come back together fully. It wasn't the traditional path, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it felt right for us. We were rebuilding our relationship brick by brick, and that kind of work couldn't be rushed. We saw each other regularly, going on dates and spending weekends together, but we no longer tried to force things to feel normal or perfect. Instead, we focused on being honest with each other about our fears, our insecurities, and our hopes for the future. Therapy continued to be a guiding force in our journey, helping us navigate the difficult conversations that still needed to be had. One evening, after a particularly long day, Nathan and I sat on the couch in his apartment, a bottle of wine between us. The air was warm with the ease we had found in each other again, the kind of comfort that comes from truly knowing someone, flaws and all. "I've been thinking about the future," Nathan said quietly, swirling his wine glass in his hand. I looked at him, my heart skipping a beat. "What about it?" He smiled, a soft, genuine smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. "I want us to keep moving forward," he said, "but I want to do it right this time. No rushing, no pretending. Just us, however that looks." I nodded, my chest filled with a quiet sense of peace. "I want that too," I said softly. And in that moment, I realized that the future we were building together wasn't the one I had imagined years ago when we first got married. It wasn't the picture-perfect version of love that I had once thought it would be. But it was real. It was raw and messy and imperfect, and that made it all the more beautiful. We weren't who we used to be, and that was okay. As time went on, Nathan and I slowly began to reintegrate our lives. We took things day by day, celebrating the small victories. A night without tension, a moment of vulnerability shared, a new tradition started. We were still healing, still growing, but we were doing it together, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, as we walked hand in hand through the park, Nathan turned to me with a smile. "I've been thinking about something," he said, his voice playful. "Oh," I asked, raising an eyebrow. "What's that?" He stopped walking and pulled me close, his eyes sparkling with the kind of mischief that I hadn't seen in a long time. "I think it's time we took a trip together," he said, his smile widening. "A trip?" I asked, laughing softly. "Where to?" He shrugged, his grin contagious. "Anywhere. Somewhere new. Somewhere that's just for us. Not tied to our past. Not weighed down by everything we've been through. A place where we can just be." The idea filled me with excitement and possibility. A fresh start in every sense of the word. "I like that," I said, smiling up at him. "Let's do it." And as we walked through the park, planning our adventure, I realized that we had finally found our way back to each other. It wasn't the path I had expected, and it hadn't been easy, but it was ours, messy, complicated, and beautifully imperfect. We weren't the same people who had stood at the altar all those years ago, promising to love each other forever, but in a way that made our love even stronger. We had weathered the storms, faced the darkest parts of ourselves, and come out the other side with something new, something real. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that we were going to make it. Nathan and I took our trip a month later. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a small coastal town a few hours away, where the sea met the horizon in endless blues, and the salty breeze swept away the remnants of the past. For the first time in what felt like forever, we weren't looking over our shoulders, waiting for old wounds to resurface. Instead, we focused on the present, on the new version of us we had worked so hard to rebuild. The trip was simple but filled with moments that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. We laughed more than we had in years, shared quiet, intimate dinners, and talked about everything under the sun, without the heavy burden of the past hanging over us. It was just us, rediscovering each other, not as the people we used to be but as who we had become. And there was a quiet kind of beauty in that. One evening, as we sat on the beach, the waves lapping gently at the shore, Nathan turned to me, his expression soft and thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked, his voice low and reflective. I smiled, staring out at the endless stretch of ocean. "All the time," I admitted. "There were moments when I didn't think we'd make it. But now I can't imagine not being here, not going through everything we've been through." Nathan nodded, his hand reaching for mine. "I think that's what makes us stronger," he said quietly. "We didn't just survive. We grew. We rebuilt. Together." I looked at him, my heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and love. He was right. What we had now wasn't just the remnants of a broken marriage, patched together with apologies and compromises. It was something new, something more resilient, built on honesty and vulnerability. "We're different now," I said softly, squeezing his hand. "But in a good way." Nathan smiled, his eyes full of warmth. "Yeah," he whispered, "in a good way." When we returned from our trip, life didn't magically become perfect. There were still moments when doubt crept in, moments when we had to work through the lingering scars of the past. But those moments were fewer now, and they didn't define us the way they used to. We had learned to face our struggles together, rather than letting them pull us apart. The following months were filled with quiet joy. Nathan and I slowly reintegrated our lives, moving back in together but with a renewed sense of purpose. We didn't rush things. We allowed ourselves the space to continue growing both individually and as a couple. And for the first time in a long time, our home felt like a place of peace, not a battleground of unspoken resentments and fears. Therapy remained a part of our journey, helping us navigate the inevitable bumps along the way. But now, our sessions were less about healing old wounds and more about strengthening the foundation we had rebuilt. We had learned the importance of communication, of being open and honest with each other, even when it was difficult. There was something freeing in that, knowing that we could face anything as long as we were facing it together. A year after our separation, we found ourselves sitting on that same porch where we had spent so many evenings contemplating the future. But this time, the air was light, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the soft hum of summer. We weren't the same people we had been back then, and our relationship wasn't the same either. But that was okay. It was better. "I've been thinking," Nathan said one evening, his arm wrapped around my shoulders as we watched the sun dip below the horizon. "About what?" I asked, turning to look at him. "About how far we've come," he said with a smile. "And about what comes next." I raised an eyebrow, curious. "And what do you think comes next?" Nathan's smile widened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw that playful spark in his eyes, the one that had always drawn me to him. "I think we keep doing what we're doing," he said. "Living, loving, growing, together." It was such a simple answer, but it was perfect, because that's what life was now. Not some grand, dramatic narrative, but a series of small, beautiful moments, built one day at a time. "We'll take it one day at a time," I said softly, resting my head on his shoulder. Nathan kissed the top of my head, his embrace warm and comforting. One day at a time. And so that's what we did. We moved forward, slowly but surely, rebuilding a life that wasn't just a reflection of our past but a testament to our resilience, our love, and our ability to grow together. We were no longer the same people who had stood at the altar all those years ago. But we were stronger now, more real, more connected. And that, I realized, was enough. It was more than enough. As I sit here now, looking back on everything we've been through, I realized that our story wasn't about betrayal or heartache, though those were certainly a part of it. It was about growth, about learning to face the darkest parts of ourselves and each other and choosing to stay, to fight for something better. We didn't just rebuild our marriage, we rebuilt ourselves. We learned that love isn't always easy, and it isn't always enough on its own. It takes work, patience, forgiveness, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. But when it's real, when it's strong enough, it can withstand anything, even the storms that once seemed insurmountable. Nathan and I still have our moments, as all couples do, but now we face them together, knowing that we've already survived the worst. We've come out the other side stronger, more connected, and more in love than ever before. This wasn't the love story I had imagined when we first said, "I do." It was messy, complicated, and filled with heartache. But it's ours. And in the end, that's what makes it beautiful. We're still writing our story, one day at a time. And whatever the future holds, I know we'll face it together.